Thank you for watching this video from the Canada-Europe Transatlantic Dialogue at Carleton University. This event is sponsored by the Canada-Europe Transatlantic Dialogue, CETD, and the Faculty of Public Affairs Research Month at Carleton University. CETD receives funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. The views expressed in this video are solely those of the presenter and do not reflect the views of the CETD, SHRC, or Carleton University.
Thank you very much. Encore une fois, bonjour à tous, aux francophones et francophiles, et n'hésitez pas à intervenir en français si ça vous intéresse. Ça me fera plaisir d'en discuter dans cette belle langue avec vous, mais je vais faire ma présentation en anglais comme c'est la langue de la conférence. So, Manfred, it was really a pleasure to hear you speak, and for those of you who were here at the opening session when you heard me speak, you see there's a pattern here. I try to speak after the European so that I can say he's already said it all. But I do agree with most with everything that Manfred said. And I hope you'll agree with me that one cannot one has to be impressed by the framework and the toolkit that the European Union has been able to put together in a relatively short amount of time. And for outside partners, it's amazingly complex to cooperate with the EU, but it's also an amazingly powerful partner. And what you bring together is truly amazing. And if I may use that to make a small comment on something that Markus said earlier, I think that what's interesting with the EU is you have both the EU institutions and the member states, and you're at your best when you use different tools for different processes. So I actually think that the Normandy format is not a sign of weakness or of institutional failure. It's a sign that, I mean, if somebody can talk to Putin, it's Merkel. And so it's using your best assets to deal with in the most appropriate way with the most important crisis you are facing. So to have the ability to work through your member states and to use the powerful figures that they generate is actually an asset. It's not something that's wrong with institutional development in the EU. It's actually a genuinely interesting feature of it that should be retained. Being able to work in complementary ways within your own framework is actually quite useful from my perspective. So I was going to talk quickly about four things. One is how does from Brussels, how does the EU view Canada? Like, after I've been almost there for 2 years, so what's my assessment as to how the EU views us? And I'll be interesting to see if Manfred agrees with what I'm going to say. The second bit is going to be about what do we do in concrete ways to actually cooperate? And how difficult is that? I mean, how complex is it to actually get that cooperation going on? I mean, for a largely academic audience, sometimes you might think that things are simpler than they are, and there is a reason why we have diplomats and why Manfred and I are so busy, and people in this room. How do you actually make this work? And I'll give a few examples there. And my third point, and I'll try to be very brief in each case, but third point is, so one of the things we do in terms of trying to find ways to cooperate is to create dialogues between the EU and Canada. That's not actually explicit security cooperation, but it's actually, there are tools that lead to it. And I'll give you a few examples of how these dialogues have the potential to lead to more. And then finally, I'll talk a bit about where I see the EU going in terms of your foreign policy, this strategic review, or this global strategy that Manfred alluded to, but a few other elements, and where that might open up for a possibility for cooperation with Canada. But I'm also very much interested in hearing from you. We're at a very interesting time in Canada-EU relationship, because we have a new government with a new mandate, and there is a genuine desire from the government to engage in peace support operation, to engage in peacekeeping, to engage in these types of things. And I'm quite curious to see what an academic audience thinks. Where do you see the greatest potential for Canada-EU cooperation? I'm kind of interested in hearing from you, either informally after this or in part of the Q&A, as part of the Q&A. So how does the EU view Canada? What keeps surprising me in Brussels is how important, in a way, we are to them. because Canadians, I mean, we see themselves as small compared to the U.S. We have this kind of we never see ourselves as big, although geographically we are, and we're still the 10th largest economy on earth. But we are modest about how we see ourselves. That's very I think hopefully you'll agree that that's a Canadian feature. And when you're in Brussels, and if you look at the world from the perspective of the EEAS, what's out there? So they have 10 strategic partners. They can't, I mean, if you're the EEAS, you can't work with your own membership, so you have to look at the rest of the world. So the EEAS can't cooperate, so you have to strike out Germany, France, the UK, Denmark, because they're you. So you can't. What else is there? So you have Canada, you have the US, you have China, you have Brazil, you have Russia, you have Australia, you have. And if you look at that list, who's like-minded? Who's really, really, really like-minded with you? Well, it's Canada. And there's the US too, I think, in all honesty. And I think today you'll see just how like-minded Canada and the US can be. And we do hope that you give an equal welcome to the Prime Minister when he goes to Brussels for the summit, as he's going to get in Washington today.
We gave him a pretty good welcome when he came to our reception the other day.
Yes. So that's fantastic. But if you're the EU, and you're looking for partners, Canada stands pretty high on the list because there aren't that many other like-minded partners around the world. Not that Russia is not important, not that Brazil is not important, but we really think alike. So it's never difficult to get a meeting in Brussels if you're a Canadian. It's never difficult to engage. It's never difficult to. There's something that they really value us more in a way than we value you here. Because when I'm here and I look at France. I look at Germany, I look at Denmark, I look at your member states, and I look at the EU too. So we see you as part of a constellation of partners. You see us as clearly at the top of, or near the top of your list of like-minded partners. So there's a different perspective, and sometimes that leads to differences of perspective on how we should work together. Anyways, I just thought I'd share that observation. In terms of current cooperation, which is my second point, so how do we work together on peace and security issues and crisis management? I mean, the panel is called crisis management, but I'm assuming that it means dealing with international security crises. So I'm adopting a broader view. It's not just managing crisis, but how do we cooperate on international security issues more generally? Well, here, what's interesting for Canada is, I mean, because of the toolkit that Manfred alluded to, and because of the very significant financial resources that you bring to everything. I mean, you're big, and the EAS might have modest funding, but it's the foreign ministry of a 500 million people rich continent. So what you bring in terms of funding to peace operations, to development programming is huge. So you're a very valued partner, and you're one of the only organizations out there that does peace missions. I mean, there's the UN that does peace mission. There's the OSCE. There's NATO. There's the OAS a bit, but in terms of but CSDP missions are kind of the equivalent, in many ways, of a genuine UN peace support mission. I mean, you are one of very few actors who really does these things, and you do it well. So that's why you're an extremely attractive partner for us. Now Canada only participates in 2 missions. The mission in the Palestinian territories on police support, and the mission in Ukraine. We've participated in a lot more in the past, and we hope to participate in more in the future. But certainly, I was involved in our participation in the Ukraine mission. And now Canada provides, I mean, only 4 police officers, but very senior police officers who actually have leadership positions within the mission and who provide genuine advice to the Ukrainian government. We are very closely with you in terms of making that mission a success. It's from our perspective, it's a very useful and money efficient conduit for our aid to Ukraine in that particular sector. But it took almost a year for us to be able to provide 4 officers. And there was huge political will. So on both sides to make this happen. I mean, if you don't, Ukraine has been a foreign policy priority for Canada forever, but in particular in recent years because of Russia's actions. So how come it's so difficult to make such cooperation work in practice. And I think that there are lessons that we need to learn how to make this, how to work better together. And I think on our side, aligning our planning and financial processes or trying to make them flexible enough so that they can align with yours is a challenge. On your side, consulting outside partners is something you should do at an earlier stage in the process. So we're trying to learn lessons from that participation in those in the Ukraine mission to try to see if we can make this even better in the future. Let's go to my third point, which is dialogues. So beyond participating in how does consultations at an earlier stage in the process on emerging issues lead to possible concrete cooperation? And I mean, Canada and the EU have I think, at least 20 ongoing formal policy dialogue processes. Some of them work better than others, I have to say, but they've led to fantastic successes in terms of, for example, our human rights dialogue is really a genuine meeting of minds in terms of how we advance human rights issues internationally, including our Iran resolution at the UN, but also issues related to women's rights, and the Day of the Girl, for example, is a good example of Canada-Europe success in terms of promoting common views as a result of a dialogue. So some of them work well, but two of them are being set up now or relaunched and re-energized. And I'm very happy that Ambassador Konings talked about the high-level dialogue on energy. And I think we have a colleague from NRCan here who actually engaged in it, Paul. So if you want to talk to him a bit more about it, he's here. But one important component of that dialogue is cooperation on Ukraine energy security. So see, a dialogue that you wouldn't think has a security dimension, it's energy, so you would think it's about ensuring that Canada and the EU can cooperate can maximize their ability to benefit from each other's energy resources or need for resources, can be used to pursue international security objectives. And as done, and I think it's interesting to see that even our Department of Natural Resources is engaged in security work in Ukraine in a way that is compatible with what the EU does, and will hopefully be bolstered by this energy dialogue that is now being relaunched. Another dialogue that we've relaunched recently, or that we're trying to re-energize as well, is the dialogue on climate change and the environment. And here, we're only at the beginning, but I do think that there's potential to look at issues such as impact of climate change on conflict, and how the EU and Canada can actually work more closely together in terms of assessing the impact and dealing with it. So I would throw that out there as a promising area for future cooperation. Finally, I wanted to talk about the from Brussels, like an outsider in Brussels, because we, as a third country diplomat, as we are called in Brussels, because we're not members of the EU, what do I see in terms of where the EU is going in terms of security challenges and how it's responding to them? I see the EU global security policy strategy, and I applaud the EU's very transparent approach to consulting on it. There's a very smart academic from Italy, who I think you know well, Natalie Tocci, who's been asked by Madame Mogherini to lead the process, and it should be released in a few months. But when you look at what's going to emerge from it, it's anybody's guess now, because it's not. I think they're still really trying to form their thoughts. But some of the elements that emerge are there needs to be a closer link between the EU's internal challenges and its external policy. And I think the migrants refugee crisis that we are seeing now, coupled with the terrorist attacks that Europe has suffered from in especially France in the latest years, will be a driving force in terms of how do you use the EU's external action to better address challenges to the EU's internal security. There's also something that I really like, and that Madame Mogherini talks a lot about. It's in all her speeches. It's making multilateralism work. And I think there's huge potential synergies with our new government's renewed interest in multilateralism here. And there's also, thankfully, in that strategy, a constant, there should be something along the need to go beyond the neighborhood. That's a bit in contradiction with some of what I said earlier in terms of focusing on Europe's immediate internal security threats. But you can't forget Asia. You can't forget Latin America. You can't forget, and again, there might be greater scope for Canada and the EU to work together in addressing security challenges beyond Europe's neighborhood. But alongside with this EU global strategy, the EU has also recently released its European neighborhood policy, which I really urge you to read. It's something that it's a fantastic piece of work. I think it comes partly from the EES, but also from the folks dealing with enlargement within the Commission. But it addresses how the EU, in a very smart way, if you ask me, how it's going to shape its relationship with 16 countries in its immediate neighborhood, many of which are countries where Canada wants to be active as well. North Africa, for example, but also Ukraine and beyond. And I think there's actually scope for greater Canada-EU cooperation within the context of the neighborhood policy, in addition to the global strategy. I could go into a bit as to where I think that might be possible if you'd like in the Q&A, because I think I've already exceeded my time. Beyond that, there are new areas such as cyber foreign policy or foreign policy of the internet, where Canada and the EU are very close partners, and there's so much to be done in that particular area, and we're so like-minded in so many ways that that's also an area for future cooperation. So I'll stop here. I hope that's been helpful. It was longer than I thought it would be, so apologies for that, but I hope it was still useful to you, and I really look forward to your views as to where we could cooperate more with the EU.